So we're now turning to Yud Gimel Amid Beis, and the Gemara says the following. Supposing in the context of the suffix of ben rechumi, we will come to the conclusion that kol bi'anpe, anytime a person says the word v'ani in the presence of the first node there. So that means that when Shimon said v'ani, he declared v'ani in the presence of Ruvain, and here on the top of Yud Gimel Beis ksifale milsa. It would be a busha if he didn't identify with the hodah of Ruvain that his wife would have a son, and therefore certainly he was makabel al atzmo nazirus if his friend would have a son. And that would be a demonstration of the fact that he is so close to his friend, and his friend is so beloved to him, that he accepts this hodah for the fact that his friend had a son. And that's called rechima loch kavasech. However, that's only because when Shimon declared vani, it was in the presence of Reuven. However, Omar Reini Nazir l'shiahei leploni ben, supposing Reuven made a declaration, I should be a Nazir, when someone else, when Shimon will have a ben, and now Vishama Chavero, and his friend, right? So let's say we'll give him names. Reuven makes a declaration, I will be a Nazir when my friend, my good friend Shimon will have a son. V'shama Chavero, and now Shimon heard it, and he wants to be reciprocal. V'amar v'ani, and in this case it was Shalom b'fanav, as we'll soon see. But before we get to Shalom b'fanav, it could be possible that since we're applying the principle of Rechimna Loch Kavasech, if we apply that principle, then basically what we have is an exact mirror image where Reuven says, I'll be so happy if you, Shimon, will have a son. Shimon, when he says Vani, what he meant to say was, I'll be so thrilled when you have a son, when you, Reuven, have a son. But both of them are longing for a son. Me, Amrin, should we say, no, Shalom b'fanav. This is a case where Shimon took his Vani, not in the presence of Reuven. There's no element of busha here. V'anaf sheikama. He was just using the verbal declaration of Reuven and attaching Vani like ditto marks, as if I said about myself that I would be Makabel Nazirus when my wife would give birth. O Dilma Hachi Karmale. Or perhaps this is what he had in mind. Even though it's Shalom b'fanav, Rechimna le Kavasech. I love you just as much as you love me, and as much as I love you, I love you. And therefore, when you were Makabel Nazirus, that you'll have a son, meaning that I'll have a son, meaning because Reuven said that when Shimon have a son, so too, my Nazirus would be Chal when you will have a son, when Reuven will have a son. So again, it's exact mirror image. If you hold Rechima Loch Kavasech, applies even Shalom b'fanav. The first side is to say, no. If it's Shalom b'fanav, he doesn't have kisufa, and he doesn't have to prove that he'll be so happy, for someone else's simcha, and therefore nafshei kama. But according to the second side, even if it's lav lefanav, lav lefanav, nevertheless rechima le kavasech tiboy, which means it remains a suffix. I never understood why the Gemara sometimes says teku and sometimes says tiboy. The Mishnah now on Daf Yud Gimel Amid Beis is an extension of what we discussed until now about someone who's Makabel Nazirus when he will have a son. Hareini Nazir, Vin Nazir, Kishayeli Ben. He accepts upon himself two Nazirios, one unconditional, absolute, in which case when he says Hareini Nazir, immediately he's a Nazir, but then he adds the word Vin Nazir L'Kishayeli Ben, And in addition, I have a second Nazirus that accepting, which will be Chal if and when my wife gives birth to a son. So what we see here is like an overlap of two Nazirios. And the Mishnah establishes that Hiskil Mona Eshalo, V'achach Nolad Lo Benu Mashlim Eshalo, V'achach Mona Eshal Beno. The Mishnah establishes that we need one continuous Nazirus. We're not going to break up a Nazirus in the middle and pick it up later on. So let me just explain the Havamina, which is the Mishnah's Lafuke. The Havamina would be that if he started his Nazirus, because he said already Nazir, then his wife gave birth to a boy, he stops his first Nazirus, picks up his second Nazirus in the aftermath of his wife giving birth to a ben, and 30 days down the line, he completes that Nazirus, and whatever amount of days are in the balance are remaining from the first Nazirus, he will now pick up where he left off. So that there's another Nazirus wedged in between the beginning of this Nazirus and the end of this Nazirus. Mishnah says, no, that's not so. But rather, he will complete his first Nazirus, and only then will he begin his second Nazirus. However, is there a case, the Mishnah says, where he could actually wedge in a second Nazirus between the beginning of the first Nazirus and the end of the first Nazirus? And that's the case that the Mishnah is going to address now. Hareini Nazir Kishayeli Ben. He started in the other direction. His initial Kabbalah's Nazirus was the conditional Nazirus that would generate his Nazirus when his wife gives birth to a son. And then he says, Vin Nazir. Now I'm accepting upon myself a second Nazirus, which is unconditional, a Stam Nazirus, without any Tanai. So then the Mishnah says, Hiskil Mona Esh Shalo. Then after he says Vin Nazir, meaning the second Kabbalah, he begins his Nazirus immediately. The Achakach, when his wife gives birth, Noah Ben, Meiniach Es Shalom. Let's say he did 20 days of Nazirus. So he didn't finish his Nazirus yet. And now his wife gives birth to a son. Immediately, he has to start observing the Nazirus that was conditional on the birth of his son. Umonesh Eshel Beno, he counts 30 days of that Nazirus. The Achakach, Umashlim Eshelo. He had only observed 20 days of his own Nazirus, so he's missing 10 days. After the 30 days of Niyug Nazirus for the conditional Nazirus after his wife gives birth to a ben, then he picks up his first Nazirus where he left it off, and he continues with another 10 days of Nazirus. Now, the reason for this is because since he started and opened up with a Kabbalah's Nazirus al Tnaik Kishieli Ben, immediately when his wife gives birth, he has to be knowing that Nazirus. The fact that he was already knowing a different Nazirus is not going to trump the Nazirus that he's obligated in now, because he said Kishayeli Ben as his opening statement. It's not like the first case in the Mishnah. Boy Rava. Oh, I just want to add one more point here that we should keep in mind as we go through the sugya, and that is that at what point in time will he terminate the Nazirus with Giluach and Karbanos? That's going to be only after he completes his, I'm going to call it second Nazirus, but it's really in a sense the first Nazirus because he started it first. But it's the second Nazirus in sequence, and he needed that extra 10 days to be mashlim the first Niyug Nazirus. When he finishes that 10 days, at that point, he's Megaleach on two Nazirus of 30 days each, 60 days, and then he brings two karbanos, two sets of karbanos. One set of karbanos on his own Nazirus and the other on Nazirus Beno, as we call it. I mean, they're both his own Nazirus. By Rav, Amar Hareini Nazir Liachar Esrim Yom. Okay, here's a case where he accepts upon his Nazirus in a way that'll be Chal only 20 days down the line. And 20 days from now, he'll start being Noeg his Nazirus for a full 30 days. Then he says, but I want to start a Nazirus now, before the 20 days, of Mea Yom, of 100 days. So you and I might say, before we get to the suffix of Rava, that in such a case, he will begin his Nazirus of Mea Yom. He'll get up to day 20, and after day 20, he'll start his Nazirus of Liachar Esrim Yom. 30 days later, you have 30 plus 20. And now on day 50, he will begin to be mashlim the other 80 days. You remember that song, Around the World in 80 Days? Okay, you're not in my age bracket, but anyway, there used to be a song that you could go around the world in a balloon in 80 days. Anyway, so he will need now another 80 days to complete the Nazirus of Mea Yom, because he only observed 20 days of Nazirus. That would be the simple answer to Rava's question. Mal. Keva da'alon Mea be esrin lo shlemin. Right? He cannot complete his Nazirus of 100 days after 20 days, because now what's Chal is the first Nazirus that he accepted upon when he said already knows Liachar Esrim Yom. So now he's going to have to interrupt his Nazirus of 100 days after 20 days of observing Nazirus in order to count 30 days for the Nazirus of Liachar Esrim Yom. Now, he doesn't want to be mafsik in the middle of his Nazirus, is lo chaylim. Therefore, if we assume that his mental state, his intention, when he took upon his Nazirus of Mea Yom was that it would be 100 continuous days, then his Nazirus of 100 days will only be chal after he completes his Nazirus that he was makabel first, namely of Liachar Esrim. So only on day 50 will he begin the entire process of Mea days. And we'll see how that squares with our mission. Oh, Dilma, or shall we say, Kevan de Islay Gidul Ser Lebasof Chaylin. Or shall we say that when he completes his Nazirus of 100 days, he'll have plenty of hair that grew. So why does he care if he has to be mafsik his Nazirus in the middle with another Nazirus, the Nazirus of Liachar Esrim Yom? And therefore, immediately the Nazirus of Mea Yom is chal, because it wasn't a postponed Nazirus. And therefore, he's going to be noeg 20 days of Nazirus, and then begin his Nazirus of Liachar Esrim Yom for 30 days. And after 50 days, he will be able to be noeg Shmonim Yom. So even before the Gemara is going to compare Rav to Mishnah, the Gemara immediately jumps in and interrupts and says, "V'tibayale, why does Rav have to formulate this suffix in such a complicated case? Why not b'nazirus mu'etes? Let's say a person says Hareini Nazir Liachar Esrim Yom, and then he says v'nazir me'achshav, that is, Nazir should start now, a second Nazirus, and immediately we have the same suffix, the same vacillation as Rava. Shall he begin with his Nazirus Shnia of Me'achshav, right? The second one that he was Makabel was Me'achshav. And it doesn't bother him that he'll have to take a break in the middle and then pick it up later. O Shema bi Esrim Yoma Rishonim lo chal Nazirus klal. There was no Nazirus at the beginning of the 20 days. He wants to do one flow, continuous, non-broken up Nazirus. So again, why did you have to introduce the Mea Yom over here, Rava? Why didn't you say the following? The first Nazirus, as you said, Rava, was liachar esrim, and then he was makabel another nazirus, which would be stam nazirus of shloshim yom. It didn't have to be a nazirus of 80 days. And the Gemara answers, Rava chada migo chada kami boile. The truth is that Rava was asking both questions, and we were meant to understand one question after we achieve and understand the answer to the other question. So Rava, in fact, first asked this question that the Gemara is addressing now, of Nazirus Muetas, meaning a minimal Nazirus of 30 days. So he said, Hareini Nazir liachar esrim yom, and then he says, Vin Nazir Stam. And that was Rava was wondering back and forth, fascinating. Do we say that he begins his Nazirus, the second Kabbalah, now, immediately? Or should we wait until he finishes his Nazirus that was conditional liachar esrim yom? And then moving on to Daf Yudal, Imtim Salomar, Nazirus Mu'etes. You might want to argue that in a case of Nazirus Mu'etes of Shloshim Yom. So again, what's the case? This was Rava's first suffix, which wasn't originally formulated. Now the Gemara is filling it in. He accepted upon himself Nazirus liachar esrim yom, and now he accepts upon himself Nazirus me'achshav. Is keva the asori yomim hu di yasrin lo solikle halein asara. Shall we say that he didn't want to leave 10 days? 10 days is a very stingy kind of kiyum of Niyug Nazirus. So after he completes his Nazirus of liachar esrim, what is he left with? Right? If he starts his Nazirus of me'achshav now, he'll get 20 days of Nazirus in, and then he's going to have to, after he finishes the Nazirus of liachar esrim, which is 30 days, so we get to day 50, then he has to plug in another 10 days. He says he doesn't want to interrupt his Nazirus and leave 10 days left to his Nazirus. That's not chashiv. That's not enough of a Nazirus to constitute a Nazirus. There's no Nazirus in halacha of 10 days. And therefore, for sure, his kavanah was that he shouldn't be knowing his Nazirus of 20 days for the me'achshav of Nazirus, but rather he should start the whole enterprise of Nazirus of me'achshav after he finishes his Nazirus of liachar esrim. However, says Rava, now I have a real suffix, because now I'm not going to talk about a Nazirus mu'etes, but rather a Nazirus of mea yom. And therefore, maybe you could argue that Vadai Nazir mea yom came into Islay Tamnin Yomi L'Basov Slikale. He doesn't mind filling in a full 80 days of Nazirus after he completes his Nazirus of liachar esrim with 30 days, so he gets to day 50. And on day 50, he'll start counting 80 days. And that doesn't bother him. Slikinle, he's very happy that he'll be mitzaref the 80 days of Nazirus to the 20 days that he started with. Ola. Or should we say, no, even in this case, he doesn't want a hefsek in his Nazirus. He wants continuous, unbroken Nazirus. And therefore, when he accepted himself Nazirus, he really had in mind that for the first 20 days, he's not a Nazir, and he's mutar b'yayin, etc. And then, after he completes the Shloshim Yom of the Nazirus of liachar esrim, then and only then will he begin his 100-day Nazirus. And he's not interested in breaking it up. Now, the Gemara later on is going to try to be poshet, at least the first suffix of Rava, so that Emir Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Let's just make a note of where we got up to, because the Gemara keeps going on a chadgadia here of one suffix after another suffix. So we're up to the imtim tzalomer chayle. And that's in Yirtzeh Hashem, line 4. That's where we'll start Lineder tomorrow. So we'll meet tomorrow if it works out at actually tomorrow is Monday, so that could be good at 7:30 as well, correct? And then Tuesday we'll do it a drop early. Okay then? So Refuah Shleima, I hope you're feeling well, and you should have a great day.